Camp Resurrection. Chapter 1. Mary woke to the smell of cedar and old rain. For a long moment she did not move. The ceiling above her was raw plank, knotted, water-stained in a brown bloom that had spread across two boards. A spider had strung a web in the corner where the wall met the rafter. She watched it sway in a draft she could not feel. Her mouth tasted of pennies. Her head felt packed with wet wool. She did not know where she was. She turned that fact over slowly, the way you test a sore tooth with your tongue, and found no panic underneath it, just a flat, gray blank. She did not remember falling asleep. She did not remember a car, a road, a door. She did not remember yesterday at all. She sat up. The cabin held 8 bunks in 2 rows. Most were empty, blankets thrown back, sheets cold. On the bunk nearest the door, a young woman slept curled tight, dark hair across her face, one fist clenched against her chest like she was holding something even in her sleep. Across the room, a thin man lay flat on his back with his eyes already open, staring at nothing, breathing slow through his nose. "You don't remember either," the man said. It was not a question. His voice carried a faint accent Mary couldn't place, somewhere far from here. "Do you?" "No," Mary said. "None of us do," he said. He sat up in one smooth motion, no grogginess to it, like a man who had trained himself to wake all at once. He was lean, dark-eyed, maybe 30. "I've been awake an hour. I checked the doors. I checked the windows. We're not locked in." He paused. "That should comfort me more than it does." The sleeping woman stirred. Her eyes came open and they went hard and clear in less than a second, scanning the room before her body had finished waking. She looked at the man, then at Mary, then at the door. "Where the hell is this?" she said. Nobody answered because nobody knew. They found the others in the center of the camp, in the dirt clearing where the paths all met. 5 of them total. They stood apart from each other in a loose, wary ring, the unconscious geometry of people who do not trust the strangers they've been thrown in with. There was the thin, dark-eyed man from the cabin, who told them his name was Amir and said little else. There was the woman with the clenched fist, who said her name was Sokka and watched everyone's hands. There was a big blond man, broad through the shoulders, who couldn't keep still, rocking on his heels, cracking his knuckles, eyes flicking. He said his name was Josh and said it like a challenge. There was a man named Greg, quiet, narrow, with a stillness to him that wasn't the same as calm. And there was Mary. "Okay," Josh said. "Okay, somebody explain this. Anybody. Last thing you remember, go." "A bar," Sokka said. "Maybe there was a bar. After that, nothing." "I was driving," Greg said softly. He frowned. "Or I was a passenger. I can't." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I can't get it to hold still." "Nothing," Amir said. "I remember nothing at all," which is its own kind of information. They were not what a summer camp's clientele should look like. They were too old, for one, all of them past 25 at a guess. And there was something else, a hardness that didn't match the cheerful, flaking paint on the cabins. These were not soft people. Mary felt that without being able to say how she knew it. She felt, too, the small, ugly currents already moving between them. The way Josh's eyes had crawled over Sokka and over her own body. The way Greg watched everyone and gave nothing back. The forest stood close on every side, a wall of pine and birch that swallowed the light 10 feet in. No road, no car, no power lines that Mary could see. A wooden archway marked the entrance to the clearing, and burned into it in a cheerful camp counselor font were 2 words. Camp Resurrection. "Anybody got a phone?" Josh said. Nobody did. They had checked. Pockets empty, every one of them. No wallets, no keys, no identification. They had names and faces and nothing else. "We could walk," Sokka said, not like she believed it. She turned a slow circle, reading the tree line. "Pick a direction. Walk till we hit a road." "Could be 10 miles of woods in every direction," Amir said. "Could be 50. We don't know which way. Walk wrong and we're sleeping in the open with no water." He shook his head once. "Not yet. Not until we know more." The lodge sat at the head of the clearing, the largest building, with a deep porch and a stone chimney. Inside it smelled of dust and propane. There were long tables, a kitchen behind a counter, a cold stone hearth. On the tables, fanned out like somebody had set them there on purpose, were stacks of glossy paper brochures. Mary picked one up. "A second chance at the life you were meant to live," the cover read, over a photo of a sunrise through pines. Inside, in warm, reassuring paragraphs, it explained that Camp Resurrection was a residential transformation program for young men and women who had lost their way. "Dear parents," one section began, You have done everything you can. You have prayed, you have pleaded, you have wept. Let us carry this burden now. Here your child will be broken down to the studs and rebuilt in righteousness. Here the old self dies so the new self may rise. There was scripture salted through it, half-quoted, slightly wrong, verses about death and resurrection, about the narrow gate, about being born again. There was a tuition schedule. There were testimonials from grateful families with no last names. Re-education camp, Sokka said over her shoulder. She'd been reading along, her mouth twisted, for rich people's screwed-up kids. We're not kids, Mary said quietly. Sokka looked at her. No, she agreed, we're not. A door at the far end of the lodge banged open, and a man came through it clapping. He clapped like a man at the end of a long-awaited arrival, big swinging claps, his face split in a grin that reached all the way to his eyes. He wore a polo shirt the color of a robin's egg. He was middle-aged, soft in the middle, with a sunburned scalp under thinning hair. He looked like he coached a church softball league. He looked like he sold above-ground pools. There they are, he sang out. There they are, awake at last. Oh, I am so glad to see all 5 of you up and moving. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this group. Welcome, welcome to Camp Resurrection. He pressed both hands to his chest. My name is Abe. I am your counselor, your coach, and your shepherd through what is going to be the most important week of your entire lives. They stared at him. I know, Abe said warmly. I know you have questions. You're confused, you're scared, maybe you're a little angry. That's healthy, that's good. We'll get to all of it. He spread his arms wide. But first, I want you to know something, and I want you to really hear me. Someone out there really loves you, all of you. They love you so much that they gave you the greatest gift a person can give. They gave you another chance. Isn't that beautiful? Where are we? Amir said. Somewhere safe. Why don't we remember anything? Abe nodded like this was a wonderful question, his favorite question. Because you were taken, he said gently, in the night, while you slept or while you were doing whatever it was you do. You were given something to make you sleep, and you were brought here because if we had asked you to come, you'd have said no. People in your condition always say no. His smile softened into something that wanted to look like sympathy. It's an extreme measure. I won't pretend it isn't. But by the time a soul reaches the state yours were in, gentle measures are a luxury we cannot afford. Your memories will come back, a little at a time over the next few days. Some of what you remember is going to be hard. He looked around at all of them, slow, one face to the next. I want you to be ready for that. You drugged us, Josh said. His voice had gone tight. You kidnapped us. Your families. You kidnapped us. Josh took a step forward. His hands had curled. I don't care who paid you. I don't care what's on that pamphlet. You're gonna walk us out of here. You're gonna point us at a road, or I swear to God. Josh, Abe's voice didn't change. Still warm, still kind. I really do believe in you. I want you to know that before we begin. Josh rushed him. It was fast, a big strong man covering 6 feet in 2 strides, his fist already cocked. Mary flinched back, and Abe, soft little Abe in his robin's egg polo, moved. She did not fully see it. None of them did. There was a sound like a melon dropped on tile, wet and final, and Josh's head snapped sideways at an angle a head should not reach. Abe's hand was a blur, then another sound, then another, and Josh's nose folded flat across his face. Blood sheeted down. A third blow drove him to his knees in the dirt. A fourth put him on his back, and Abe stood over him and brought his fist down once more with no more strain than a man knocking on a door. Something in Josh's face gave way with a crunch. He stopped moving. Abe straightened up. His knuckles were red and dripping. A spray of Josh's blood had freckled across his cheek and the front of his polo, bright against the powder blue, and he didn't wipe it away. He turned to the 4 of them frozen at the tables, and the grin came back, wider than before. Hugh, he said, and laughed, breathless, delighted. Now, he'll be fine. He'll have a heck of a headache. Let that be a little lesson for all of us about managing our impulses. He clapped his bloody hands together once. Tonight is yours, truly. Rest, relax, get to know each other. There's food and drink in the lodge. I made sure of it. Enjoy yourselves. Tomorrow, his eyes shone, tomorrow the real fun begins. He walked out the way he'd come, whistling. Out past the lodge, past the last cabin, where the dark under the pines was thickest, something stood and watched them through the windows. It did not move. It had been standing for a long time. It was very large, a head and a half taller than any man in the camp, and broad past reason, its shoulders blotting out the trees behind it. Over its face hung a sack of filthy burlap, eye holes torn ragged, and through them 2 points of wet light tracked the small bright shapes moving behind the glass. In one hand it held a length of rusted steel that had once been a blade. Old blood had dried black along the cutting edge in layers, the final trophy dedicated to years of hapless victims. It watched the woman with the clenched fist. It watched the quiet man who gave nothing back. It tilted the burlap sack a few degrees, the only motion in all that bulk, and somewhere under the cloth its breath came slow and thick and patient. It had all the time in the world. Chapter 2. Greg knew what to do with the body, and that frightened him more than the blood. They'd found a first aid kit bolted to the lodge wall, a real one, deep and well stocked, the kind you'd find in a place that expected injuries. They laid Josh out on one of the long tables. He was breathing shallow but steady, his face a swollen ruin, and Greg's hands had simply known. They moved before he told them to. He'd irrigated the worst of the wounds, set the broken cartilage of the nose with 2 fingers and a steady pull that made Sokka turn away, threaded a curved needle and begun to close a gash along the brow with neat, even, locking stitches. "You a doctor?" Sokka asked. "I don't know." Greg's voice was barely above the hiss of the propane lamp. He watched his own hands work. "I don't think so, but I know this. I know the names of all of it. The orbital bone here, the supraorbital nerve. I know how deep I can go before I hit something that bleeds bad." He tied off a stitch. "Where would I learn that?" "Med school," Mary offered. Maybe he didn't believe it. She could hear that he didn't. He worked in silence after that. The others drifted off, Amir to check the building's other doors, Sokka to the kitchen, Mary to the window where she stood looking out at the dark and the tree line she could no longer see. Greg bent over Josh's slack face alone. And his finger, the index finger of his right hand, slid away from the wound he was supposed to be closing, traveled an inch to the deep gash he'd left open at the temple, and pressed in. He pushed it into the meat of the wound, past the lips of torn skin, into the wet heat of the man beneath, and he watched Josh's unconscious face for a reaction. A twitch, a flinch, some small flicker of pain answering his touch. His own breathing had gone shallow and quick. There was a warmth spreading low in his belly, a terrible pleasant heat, and a voice that was almost not a voice, more a pressure behind his thoughts that said yes. That said more. That said, "You remember this." "How's it going?" Greg ripped his finger free. Mary had come up behind him, peering down at Josh with concern. Greg's hand was shaking. He folded it into a fist below the table where she couldn't see, the fingertip slick. "Fine," he managed. He'll live." Mary nodded and drifted away, and Greg stood very still and stared at his own hand and felt his heart slamming, and he did not know himself at all. It was Mary who found the refrigerator, and after the blood and the fear, it felt like a small miracle. It was a big commercial unit in the lodge kitchen, humming, cold, and it was full. Beer, sweating cans of it, bottles of cheap vodka, cheaper whiskey, cold cuts, bread, a foil tray of brownies, and shoved in the door in a sandwich bag gone soft with age, a fat handful of weed and a packet of rolling papers. "Left by the last group, probably," Sokka said, holding the bag up to the light. "What happened to the last group?" Mary asked. Nobody wanted to chase that thought, so nobody did. They told themselves a story, the 4 of them, the kind people tell when the alternative is unbearable. The story was that maybe this place wasn't so bad. Maybe Abe was a violent lunatic, sure, but maybe if they kept their heads down and got through whatever tomorrow was, they'd walk out of here. Maybe the food was a peace offering. Maybe the worst was already behind them. They drank, God help them, they drank because they were terrified, and the cold beer was right there, and the alternative was sitting in the dark listening to the woods. Josh slept on his table in the next room. The other 4 pulled chairs around the cold hearth. The vodka came out, and the bag, and slowly the awful day began to blur at its edges. "Okay," Sokka said, 3 drinks in, the hardness in her loosening a half degree. "Game, we need a game, something to stop thinking for 10 minutes. She looked around. "Never have I ever. Everybody knows it." "I don't," Amir said. Sokka blinked. "You don't know never have I ever. Where I'm from we had other games. There was something underneath that didn't invite follow-up." She explained the rules. You hold up your fingers. Somebody says a thing they've never done. Everyone who has done it puts a finger down. Last one with fingers up is the most innocent or the biggest liar. Never have I ever, Mary started, then went pink. Never have I ever, kissed someone I just met. Sokka laughed and put a finger down. So did Greg after a beat, not looking at anyone. Amir's hand stayed up, Mary's too. Never have I ever been arrested, Sokka said. 3 fingers dropped. Mary's, after a long hesitation, came down too. Only Amir's stayed up, and the others looked at him, and he only smiled a thin smile that said nothing. The game went on. It got looser and warmer, and now there was a charge moving in the small circle that hadn't been there before, the old electricity of strangers in firelight. Sokka's knee had ended up against Greg's. When she leaned in to take the bottle, her hand lingered on his arm. Greg held very still under her touch, like a man holding still around an open flame. Across the circle, Mary felt Josh's absence and was glad of it, and felt also, distantly, Amir's flat assessing eyes moving from face to face, counting, weighing, the only one of them not getting drunk. Mary stood up too fast. The room tilted pleasantly. "Bathroom," she said, and nobody noticed her go. Chapter 3. The bathroom was off the lodge's back hall, and the bulb in it had burned out, so Mary did her business in the dark with the door cracked for the light. When she came out, buttoning, the hall was empty, and the laughter from the hearth came thin and far away. That was when she heard it. A voice outside, faint from somewhere past the back door out in the black, a man's voice, cracked and weak, calling. She couldn't make out words, just the shape of them, the rising tone of a question, of a plea. Help. It sounded like help. She should have gone back to the others. She knew that even then, with the vodka in her, she knew it. But there was a part of Mary, a part that flashed out sometimes from under the meek and downcast surface she showed the world, that wanted to see. That always wanted to see. She pushed open the back door and stepped out into the cold. There was another building back there, smaller, a squat structure with a tin chimney. A kitchen, an outbuilding something, its door hung open. The voice had come from there, she was almost sure. She crossed the wet grass with her arms wrapped around herself, her breath ghosting, the music from the lodge fading behind her until there was only her own footsteps and the vast breathing silence of the trees. "Hello," she said into the dark doorway. The smell hit her first. Old grease, cold ash, and under it something sweeter, ranker, that her stomach knew before her mind did. She stepped inside, shapes resolved, a counter, a wall of hanging pots and pans, dull steel in the dark, a long sink. Crash. The pots came down all at once, a deafening clatter of falling steel, and Mary screamed and spun toward the sound, heart hammering against her ribs. She stared at the heap of fallen cookware. Her own pulse roared in her ears. Nothing moved. Nothing was there. Just pans knocked from a hook, settling on the floor with small dwindling rings. Just pans, she told herself, just. 2 hands seized her shoulders from behind. She was wrenched around. A face hung an inch from hers, and it was a dying man's face, gray, slick with sweat, the whites of the eyes flooded red where the vessels had all burst at once. His lips were cracked and dark. His breath stank of copper and something chemical underneath. His fingers dug into her shoulders with a strength that didn't match how close he was to death. "What did you do?" he screamed into her face. "What did you do to me?" His body convulsed. A gout of blood came up out of him, black in the dark, splashing down her front, and he folded, his hands tearing free of her shoulders. He hit the floor and began to thrash. His heels drummed the boards, his back arched. He vomited again, more, a horrible wet heaving, his red eyes rolling to find her even as he died, locked on her face, and Mary was screaming, backing into the wall of pans and light, the doorway full of bodies. Sokka first, then Greg, then Amir crowding in, hands grabbing her, voices overlapping. "Mary, Mary, hey, what happened?" There's a man, She pointed at the floor, her whole arm shaking. They looked. The floor was bare. Cold boards, a scatter of fallen pans, a film of old grease. No body, no blood. The front of Mary's shirt, where she could have sworn the black gout had splashed her, was dry and clean. "There's nobody here, Mary," Sokka said, gentler than Mary expected. She'd taken Mary's arm. "Okay, there's nobody here. He grabbed me, he was right." "That's some strong stuff." Amir crouched, ran 2 fingers across the floorboards, came up with nothing but dust. He looked up at her, and his eyes weren't unkind, but they weren't believing either. "We probably all had a little too much. It's been a day to drive anyone out of their mind. I wasn't that high, but even as she said it, her certainty was draining away. The room was so ordinary. The pans had simply fallen. She had been drinking. She had been terrified all day. Maybe. They walked her back, an arm around her, murmuring. Mary looked back once at the empty floor. She did not see, in the deep black past the outbuilding's window, the enormous shape that stood watching them go, that had been standing there the whole time, that had reached out one slab of a hand and tipped the pots off their hook to bring her in close. Chapter 4. While the others went to Mary, Josh woke up. He surfaced slow, dragged up out of black water by the pounding in his skull. Everything hurt. His face most of all, a vast throbbing ache behind a tightness he didn't understand until he raised a hand and found gauze wrapped across his brow, over the bridge of his nose and half across his eyes. The world came to him in a smeared blur through the gaps. Lodge, table. He was on a table. The propane lamp made a soft, fizzing yellow haze. Where was everybody? He got an elbow under himself and levered upright. The room swam and his stomach lurched. He sat on the edge of the table, breathing through it, spitting, a thread of blood and drool swinging from his lip. Through the gauze, the world was shapes and smears. He could hear, distantly, voices from somewhere in the back of the building, going away from him. And he could hear, much closer, breathing. It came from the dark beyond the lamplight, the far corner where the tables ended. Slow, heavy, thick and wet, dragging in through cloth. Josh went still. Funny, he said. His voice came out cracked. Real funny. Which one of you is it? Nobody answered. The breathing went on. Amir, you think this is funny, sneaking up on a guy? He slid off the table, his legs nearly buckled. He caught himself on the edge and stood swaying, squinting into the dark through his bandages. The shape in the corner was just a deeper black, a thing too big to be any of them, and his fogged brain insisted it was a coat rack, a stack of crates, a shadow. He limped toward it. I'm not playing. I got my head caved in today. I'm not in the mood, so whoever. The shape moved. It rose. It kept rising, unfolding upward past where a person stopped, and the lamplight caught a long edge of metal as it came up, a sweep of rusted steel lifting toward the rafters. And through the gauze across his eyes, Josh saw the moonlight from the window run silver down the blade. He threw himself sideways. The blade came down where he'd been standing and split the tabletop with a shriek of tortured wood. Josh hit the floor on his shoulder, and his stitches, Greg's neat locking stitches, popped. He felt them go, a hot zipper pull of pain across his brow, and blood sheeted down into the gauze, into his eyes, blinding him worse. He screamed. He scrambled backward on his hands. The thing came after him. It didn't hurry. It hauled the blade free of the table and came on with a slow, certain, rolling tread, each footfall shaking dust from the rafters. Josh got his feet under him. He bolted for the door, and his hip caught a chair to send him sprawling. The blade whistled down again and bit the floor an inch from his hand. He kicked away from it. More stitches tore. The whole left side of his face had come open now, a flap of brow hanging loose, blood pouring, and he was sobbing, blind, dragging himself across the floor. Help, he screamed. Somebody. The blade swung. He felt the wind of it part the air above his scalp. He flung himself flat, and his forehead cracked the leg of the heavy table he'd woken on. A dull, deep impact, and white light went off behind his eyes, and the strength ran out of his arms like water. He sagged. He couldn't make his body answer. He lay in the spreading warmth of his own blood and watched, through one half-clear eye, the enormous shape step over him and plant its feet. It raised the rusted steel high overhead with both hands, lining up the killing stroke. The lodge's front door banged open. Josh, Sokka's voice, light spilled in, footsteps. When they came through the door, there was no one standing over him. The corner was empty. The dark held nothing. There was only Josh, crumpled on the floor by the table he'd woken on, his stitches blown out, blood pooling under his cheek, a fresh swelling rising on his forehead where he'd struck the table leg. Jesus, Greg, get the kit. Sokka was on her knees beside him. He fell off the table. Look, But Amir didn't kneel. Amir stood in the doorway and let his eyes move across the room. He saw the chair knocked over, 6 feet from the table. He saw the long, fresh gash splitting the tabletop, raw pale wood, deep. He saw the dark trail leading from the table to where Josh lay, too much blood smeared wide, the trail of something dragged or fleeing. He saw it all, and he understood that a man who simply rolled off a table did not redecorate the room. He looked once more around the dark, slow, careful, and he said nothing. He filed it away, the cold, methodical part of him that had kept him alive through things he couldn't yet remember, already deciding that information was a thing you kept until it could be spent. He crossed the room and crouched to help with the bleeding. Chapter 5. They carried Josh to the cabin and laid him on a lower bunk, and Greg sewed him up again, slower this time, his hand steadier now that Mary was watching. Nobody said it out loud, but the careless story they'd told themselves at the hearth, the maybe it won't be so bad story, had quietly died on the kitchen floor. They didn't drink any more. They sat with the lamp turned low and listened to the dark. The body remembers what the mind forgets, and there was still that charge in the room, the thing the games had stirred up. When Greg had run to Mary's scream, he put himself between Sokka and the dark without thinking, one arm sweeping her behind him, and Sokka had noticed. She noticed things. She'd noticed the strange grace in his hands, the stillness in him that was not weakness. And Greg had noticed her, the unafraid set of her shoulders, how she'd taken charge of a screaming woman without a flicker. They peeled off to sleep one by one. Amir took a bunk near the door on his back, eyes open. Mary took one in the corner. Josh lay drugged on painkillers from the kit. Greg lingered in the main room a while, then went to the smaller cabin across the path alone because he did not trust himself near anyone in the dark. Sokka went to her own cabin to sleep. And something followed her across the dark grass and stopped outside her window and watched her undress. Mary couldn't sleep. She lay in the corner bunk with her eyes open and her heart still going too fast, the dead man's red eyes printed on the inside of her lids. She told herself again it wasn't real. She almost believed it. She turned over and her hand came up near her face in the dimness, and she saw the mark. It was on the back of her right hand between the knuckles and the wrist. A dark patch, brownish, the size of a dime. She frowned at it. She didn't remember bruising there. She licked her thumb and rubbed at it. It didn't smudge, it didn't fade. The skin under it felt no different, no swelling, no tenderness, just that flat brown discoloration, like a stain gone all the way through. She rubbed harder, hard enough to redden the skin around it, and the mark sat there unchanged, dark against her patient. A trick of the light, she decided, because she needed to. The lamp was low. She was exhausted. In the morning it would be nothing. She pulled her sleeve down over it, tucked her hand under the blanket where she couldn't see it, and shut her eyes. In the morning, she told herself, it would be gone. Sokka stood in her cabin in her underwear, and she heard the footstep. She went still. The cold pricked her bare skin. She did not call out and she did not move to cover herself. She listened. There, again, the careful press of a heavy foot on grass just outside the wall, a weight settling and lifting. Someone was out there. Someone was standing in the dark beside her cabin, close, and had been for a while. I hear you, she said evenly to the wall. Whoever you are, you don't want to do this. Walk away now and I won't have to hurt you. The footstep came again, closer, toward the door. Sokka did not panic. This was the strange thing she would think about later, that her body had not panicked, that her hands had gone calm and quick and certain like they'd done this before. She crossed to her bunk and gripped the metal frame and worked one of the side rails free where a weld had rusted, twisting it loose with a sharp, efficient wrench. A length of steel as long as her forearm, with a jagged, broken end. She found a strip of cloth and bound the smooth end for a grip in 3 fast wraps, testing the heft, and in under a minute she was holding a crude, heavy blade that she had not been taught to make but somehow knew how. The footsteps reached the door. She moved fast. She bunched her blanket and her spare clothes into a long shape under the sheet, a sleeper, and she crossed to the blind corner beside the door hinge and pressed her back to the wall and raised the steel. Then she waited, breathing slow through her open mouth, utterly silent. The handle turned. The door swung inward, slow, a wedge of starlight widening across the floor. A dark figure stepped through, moving toward the bunk and the false sleeper. Sokka launched off the wall. She hit him low and hard and drove him to the floor, her knee in his back, her forearm crushing his neck, the broken steel rising, and she was already swinging it down toward his eye. All that calm, cold certainty pouring out of her into the killing arc. Sokka, it's me, it's Greg. The blade stopped a finger's width from his eye. She knelt there, frozen, the steel trembling. His face stared up at her sideways in the starlight, eyes wide, his hands open and empty and raised. Greg, it was Greg. Her chest was heaving. The bloodlust was still roaring in her, a red tide that had truly wanted to drive the steel home, and she was shocked at the pull of it. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "I couldn't sleep. I came to check on you. I should have. I'm sorry." She didn't move off him. Something had shifted in the air between them, hot and electric, his body pinned under hers, both of them breathing hard, the blade still in her fist. He saw her decide. She saw him see it. Then his hands came up off the floor, not to push her away but to grip her, and he rolled them both hard, and now he had her wrists pinned to the boards above her head, his weight on her, and neither of them was pretending this was a fight anymore. "You want to play rough," she said low. "Yeah," he said, and his voice had gone strange and thick. "Yeah, I think I do." They came together with too much force, teeth and hands, the steel forgotten on the floor. They moved to the bunk in a tangle. The adrenaline of the near killing had burned straight over into this, into hands and mouths, and the desperate animal need of two people who'd spent the whole day a breath from death. It was rough. They both wanted it rough. "Choke me," she told him, pulling his hand to her throat. "Do it." And Greg's hand closed around her neck, and the moment it did, something opened behind his eyes. Flashes, white, jagged, sickening. A woman's face beneath his hand, this exact angle, this exact pressure, but the eyes bulging, the mouth working, the fear in them total and pleading. Another woman, another. A long line of them, faces under his hands in the dark, his thumbs pressing into windpipes, the small cartilage giving, the light in their eyes going out one by one while that terrible warmth spread through his belly, the same warmth, the same yes, the same pressure behind his thoughts that said this is what you are. His hand tightened. Sokka's eyes had been half closed with pleasure. Now they came open. His grip had gone past the game, past anything she liked, crushing, and her own air was gone, really gone, and she saw his face above her, and Greg was not there anymore. Something else was looking out of it. She bucked under him. She clawed at his wrist. The edges of her vision sparked and started to go gray. She could not break his grip. The steel was on the floor, was just out of reach. She tried to speak, but nothing came, the airway too constricted. It wouldn't have mattered. Greg's eyes were black and far away. His hand was a vice crushing the life out of her. In the cabin window, the glass caught the moon and caught the reflection of the two of them on the bunk. And in that reflection, Greg saw himself with his arm raised over a woman's body with a knife in his fist. He wasn't holding a knife. There was no knife. But he saw it, saw himself how he must have been some other night in some other dark, and it went through him like ice water. He tore his hand off her throat and flung himself backward off the bunk, crashing into the far wall. Sokka rolled to her side and dragged in a huge whooping breath, then another, coughing, her hand at her throat. When she could speak, her voice came out a wreck. "Get out," she rasped. "Get the fuck out." I don't know what." "Get out." He went. He stumbled to the door, holding his own right hand in his left like it belonged to someone else, like he wanted to be rid of it. He looked back at her once with an expression of such pure horror at himself that she almost felt for him. Then he was gone into the dark. Sokka sat alone on the bunk with her knees drawn up and her improvised blade back in her fist. Her bruised throat ached as she stared at the open door and wondered, for the first time but not the last, what kind of people they really were. What they'd all done before this, and what horrors might be waiting in the gaps where their memories should be. Chapter 6. Day broke gray and cold, and Abe had left them gifts. By each of their bedsides, folded with care, sat a t-shirt, powder blue like his polo, Camp Resurrection across the chest in the cheery font, and below it, in smaller letters, a new creation. Mary lifted hers and felt her skin crawl. He had come into the cabin while they slept. He had stood over each of them in the dark and laid these down by their heads, and none of them had woken. "He was in here," Sokka said. Her voice was rough. There were dark marks on her throat that she hadn't bothered to hide, 4 of them, finger-shaped, and she'd caught Greg looking at them across the cabin and held his eyes until he looked away. "He was in here while we slept and not one of us woke up. How?" Nobody had an answer. The not knowing had become its own weight they all carried now. Mary pulled her sleeves down. The mark on her hand had not faded in the night. There were more of them now. 3 new patches up the back of her wrist and one on her forearm, brown and flat and final. She did not understand them, and she did not want the others to see, so she yanked the powder blue shirt on over her long sleeves and held her arm against her body. They gathered in the clearing as the fog burned off, and Abe was waiting, beaming, fresh as a daisy. He'd changed his shirt. The new one was clean, except it wasn't. There was a brown stain across the belly that he'd done nothing to scrub out. Josh's blood from yesterday gone the color of rust. He wore it like a man wears a favorite tie. Josh stood with them barely. His face was a swollen patchwork of Greg's stitches and yesterday's bruises gone yellow-green at the edges, his eyes puffed to slits. He'd said almost nothing all morning, but he was upright, which yesterday had seemed impossible, and there was a deep, ugly hatred in the slits of his eyes whenever they found Abe. "Good morning, my new creations." Abe spread his arms. "Don't you all look wonderful, especially you, Josh. It's a whole new you now." He clasped his hands. "Today we begin the real work, and the real work is the work of the soul. Today we're going to talk about right and wrong." He paced as he talked to youth pastor with a flip chart that wasn't there. He asked them what made a person good. He asked them whether good and evil were real things, written into the bones of the world, or only stories that people agreed to tell. He talked about a voice in the head, the small voice that says don't, and he asked them whether that voice was the voice of God or only the voice of fear, of cowardice, of the herd. He asked them what they would do, really do, not in the comfort of a Sunday pew, but in the dark with the knife in their hand and no one watching. He asked them what the right thing was, and whether any of them had ever once done it when doing the wrong thing was easier. They answered carefully. Mary spoke about kindness, about trying to listen to the better voice, and her own words tasted false in her mouth even as she said them. Greg said nothing at all and looked at the ground. Amir gave answers that were clever and empty, the answers of a man saying what the examiner wanted to free himself. Sokka said that right and wrong were luxuries, that survival came first, that anyone who said otherwise had never truly been hungry. Josh, through his swollen lips, said he didn't believe in any of it. Abe listened to everything with his head tilted, nodding, smiling. And when they were done, he let the silence stretch, and then he said mildly, "That's all bullshit." They blinked at him. "Every word, pretty words you learned to say so people would leave you alone. I don't care what you say." His smile didn't waver, but something cold had come into it. "I care what you'll do. Talk is the cheapest thing there is. I want to see what's underneath." So he turned and walked toward the lodge. "Let's find out, shall we? Stay right there. Don't wander off." Chapter 7. He came back, dragging a man by the collar. The man was a stranger, middle-aged, soft, in a torn shirt, his hands bound behind him, a filthy cloth sack pulled down over the top half of his face. He stumbled and gabbled behind the cloth, his voice muffled, panicked, asking where he was, what was happening, who was there. He didn't know. Whoever he was, whatever he'd been doing an hour ago, he had no more idea why he was here than they'd had yesterday morning. Abe shoved him to his knees in the center of the clearing. Then he reached behind his back, under the blood-stained shirt, and drew a pistol. The 5 of them went rigid. "Here's the exercise." Abe's voice stayed light, conversational, while the gun moved lazily across them, pointing at Mary, drifting to Greg, settling on Josh, drifting on. He watched their faces as the barrel crossed each of them, studying who flinched and who didn't, taking notes with his eyes. "This man is going to die in the next 5 minutes. That part's already decided. The only question, the only thing you get to decide, is whether he dies alone or whether one of you joins him. Because if this man is still breathing in 5 minutes," the gun stopped on Mary's face, "I'm going to pick one of you and I'm going to put a bullet in your head. Your choice. Kill him or watch one of your new friends die for your weakness." He reached up and clicked a stopwatch hanging on a lanyard around his neck. Then he leaned down and pulled the sack off the kneeling man's head. The man was ordinary, a receding hairline, a weak chin, frightened wet eyes that found them and filled with desperate hope. "Please," he said, looking from face to face. "Please, I don't know what this is. I have a family, please. Whatever he told you, don't, please." 4 minutes and 40 seconds, Abe said pleasantly. They huddled. It was instinct, the 5 of them drawing together away from Abe and the gun and the begging man, heads down, voices low and fast. "We rush him," Josh hissed. "All 5 at once, he can't shoot all of us." "He nearly killed you with his fist yesterday," Amir said. "You want to find out how fast he is with a gun." "So we do nothing," Mary whispered. "We refuse, he can't make us." "He'll kill one of us in 4 minutes, that's what he'll do." Amir's voice was sure and quick. "He's told us exactly what he'll do. The question isn't whether, the question is who and how." Sokka's eyes had gone somewhere distant. Has to be definitive, she said quietly. Whatever it is, can't be halfway. Suffocation, Greg said. The word came out of him before he chose it low, and they all looked at him. That warmth was in his belly again, and he hated it. It's quiet. It's certain if you commit to it, no mess. He'll just pass out, Josh said, and he picked up a rock from the edge of the clearing, a good heavy stone that filled his fist, and his swollen eyes had a light in them that had nothing to do with fear. Choke a guy out, he wakes up. You want definitive. This is definitive. He hefted the rock. He was looking at the kneeling man, and he was, God help them all, smiling. And Mary saw it. Then Sokka saw it, the thing that was happening to the two men. They had stopped arguing about how to spare themselves. They were arguing about who got to do it. Greg wanted his hands around a throat. Josh wanted the weight of the rock coming down. They had each found a reason their way was the merciful way, the necessary way, and underneath the reasons was a hunger, naked and twitching, two predators who'd caught the scent and did not want to share the kill. 3 minutes, Abe called, delighted. They closed on the kneeling man. He'd backed himself into nothing, shuffling on his knees until there was nowhere left, his bound hands straining behind him, his voice climbing into a thin animal register. Josh circled with the rock. Greg flexed his hands. The man begged. Abe watched it all with the deep contentment of a man watching his garden bloom. Josh shoved Greg's shoulder. Back off, I've got it. You'll botch it, Greg shoved back. Look at you, you can barely stand. They grabbed each other. It was sudden and stupid and violent, two terrified, hungry men forgetting the gun, forgetting the clock, grappling and cursing in the dirt, and the kneeling man saw his one chance in all the world, and he took it. He came up off his knees and drove his shoulder into Abe's hip, and his bound hands, behind his back, closed somehow around the pistol Abe held loose at his side, and he wrenched it free and rolled away and came up with the gun turned around in his bound grip, pointed at all of them, his red wet, eyes wild. Abe laughed. He actually laughed, a delighted bark, and put up his empty hands. Oh, he said, oh, now this is interesting. And with his other hand, he reached behind his back and drew a second pistol, identical to the first, and let it hang easy at his side. Stay back, the bound man screamed, swinging his barrel across them. Stay back, I'll shoot. I swear to God I'll shoot. I'm not gonna die for you people are insane. You're all stay back. 1 minute, Abe sang. They froze in a loose arc around him, no weapon among them but Josh's rock, the man's stolen gun jerking from face to face. Mary's heart slammed. They were going to charge him. She could feel it building, all of them tensing to rush a terrified man with a gun, and somebody was going to die. Somebody was about to. Where was Sokka? The intrusive thought erupted in Mary's mind a half-second before the answer. Sokka was not in the ark. Sokka had peeled away into the long morning shadows along the lodge wall while the men grappled, and now she came out of them low and fast and silent, behind the kneeling man, and she had her improvised blade in her fist. She drove it into the side of his neck. He didn't get a sound out. The steel went in and she ripped it forward. A sheet of red came out of him. His stolen gun fired once into the dirt as his hand spasmed, and Sokka rode him down to the ground, where she stabbed him again in the back between the ribs, again methodical, certain, while he kicked and drowned. It took longer than it should have. It was not clean. By the end, she was painted to the elbows, and the man had stopped moving. The clearing had gone very quiet save for Sokka's heavy breathing. Mary had her hand over her mouth. Greg was watching with his lips parted and his eyes bright. Josh let the rock fall. The stopwatch beeped. Abe clapped big and joyful, beaming around at all of them. Wonderful, he said. Oh, wonderful, all of you, truly, what a session, full marks, and special commendation. He turned to Sokka, who knelt steaming in the cold over the body, blade still in her fist. Special commendation to our team leader, decisive, economical, no hand-wringing. That, my friends, is what it looks like when someone stops lying to themselves. He pressed a hand to his heart. I'm so proud. Josh moved. He scooped the dead man's fallen pistol from the dirt, brought it up, and fired it point-blank at Abe's chest. It clicked empty. He pulled the trigger again, the hammer falling on nothing, and Abe watched him do it with fond patience. And when Josh finally stopped, the gun shaking in his fist, Abe reached over and gently took it from him. It's been a big morning, Abe said kindly. I think that's enough for now. Get some rest, all of you. Save your strength. His eyes moved over them, and they were no longer entirely a man's eyes, though Mary couldn't have said what was wrong with them. You'll want it for tonight. The night games are when we really get to know each other." He smiled and turned to Sokka. "And you, our leader, have earned a prize. It's waiting in your cabin. Go on, take a look." He walked off whistling, the empty guns hanging from his hands, leaving them in a clearing with a cooling body and the smell of blood and the slow horror settling over each of them of how easy it had been. Chapter 8. The prize was on Sokka's bunk, with a little curl of ribbon stuck to it. It was a old bolt-action thing from another era, the wood of the stock worn smooth and dark with handling, the steel oiled, a sniper's rifle with a long scope, and carved into the stock in letters someone had taken time and care to cut was her own name, Sokka. She picked it up. The instant the wood settled into her hands, the world went away and she was somewhere else. She was lying in red dirt under a white sky, in fatigue stiff with sweat and filth. There was a weight on her shoulder, a scope at her eye, and a small, distant figure in the crosshairs. Then the air around her tore apart. Gunfire. Coming the other way now, a wall of it, rounds chewing the dirt, punching into her chest, her gut, her thigh. A dozen hammer blows driving her into the earth while the white sky wheeled overhead and her own blood pooled warm under her cheek. A voice somewhere was shouting in a language she knew in her bones, and she understood with total clarity that she was being executed, that this was the end of her, that. She came back in the cabin on her knees, the rifle clattered to the floor, her face wet, a scream caught in her throat, her chest heaved. She looked down at her own body for the bullet wounds that weren't there, that had been there, that she had felt punch through her one by one. There was nothing. She was whole. She was in a cabin in the woods in the cold gray afternoon, and she had no idea what had just happened to her or who she had been. She sat on the floor next to the rifle with her name on it, and she began, finally, to be truly afraid. "Do." 4 of them set out around the camp's perimeter into the trees, leaving Josh resting, walking the tree line for any break, any track, any sign that a vehicle had ever come or gone from this place. The forest was old. The boughs of its massive trees hung close and silent, no birdsong at all. They talked as they walked in low voices, comparing the shared fog shrouding their minds in place of their memories. "It's not just gone," Greg said. "It's like there's a door, and behind the door is everything, and the door's painted to look like wall, but sometimes it cracks and I see things through the crack." He didn't say what things. His hand kept opening and closing at his side. "Something in the food," Amir said. "The weed, the drink, the water has to be. They're keeping us soft, keeping the door shut until it serves them to open it." Mary walked a little apart, her bandaged hand cradled against her stomach. She started, then made herself go on. What if it's not just punishment, the name, resurrection? What if the whole thing, all of it, the awful exercises, the killing, what if it's meant to break us down to nothing so we can be built back better? Like the brochure said, the old self dies so the new self can rise. She looked around at them, almost pleading. What if whoever survives this really does walk out changed? Reborn, a second chance to be better people, to finally understand what it's worth being alive. Don't you want that? Wouldn't you take it, a real second chance if it was offered? Josh had caught up to them, drifting along at the rear, and he laughed, a wet, ugly sound through his ruined lips. "You're out of your mind," he said. "Second chance, reborn, you sound like the pamphlet." He spat. "Here's what I think. I think there's no judge. No big guy keeping score, no voice you're supposed to listen to, none of it. We're animals that learn to talk. I do what I want because I want it, and I don't lose a minute of sleep because why would I feel bad about being exactly what I am?" His swollen eyes crawled down Mary's body, slow, deliberate, and stayed there. "Some of us just admit it. The rest of you lie." Mary wrapped her arms tighter around herself and said nothing, and the look on Josh's face said he'd take whatever he wanted from her too, when he decided to, and that the thought pleased him. "That's enough," Amir said. Amir walked Josh away from the others, deeper into the trees, on the pretext of covering more ground. When they were out of earshot, he stopped and faced him. "We'll find a road faster in pairs," Amir said. "But that's not why I brought you out here. I don't like how you look at the women." Josh smiled. No. You should worry about Greg, not me. You see his hands, you see her neck this morning." Josh tilted his head. "But that's not really it, is it? It's not about them, or your bullshit chivalry. You just like telling people what they can do. Who are you to tell me anything?" "I'm the one in charge," Amir said, with a hard certainty that came from somewhere deep and practiced. Whatever this place is, somebody keeps a level head or we all die in it. That's me. My word holds. You'll fall in line. Josh's smile widened, splitting a half-healed cut at the corner of his mouth, a bead of fresh blood welling. You should tell Abe, he said softly. Since you're in charge and all, go on, tell him your word holds. I will, Amir said. Soon. And there was a dark weight under the word, a promise, the voice of a man who had handled inconvenient people before and remembered how, even with the memories locked away. Josh's hand, the one Amir couldn't see, slid down to his waistband, where since this morning he'd had a shard of something, a sharpened piece of bunk frame steel he'd worked loose and ground to a point, his own answer to Sokka's blade. His fingers closed around it. Greg and Mary walked the eastern tree line, and Greg was losing. The voice had been with him all day, the pressure behind his thoughts, and out here in the quiet, it had grown into something almost like words. It liked Mary. It liked how small she was, how soft, how she walked half-turned away from the world. It told him how easy. It told him she wouldn't even fight, not really, that the soft ones never did, and that he knew that, didn't he? He knew exactly how it went. And the door in his mind had cracked, and through the crack he saw them, the women, a long gray line of faces in the dark, his thumbs on their throats, the warmth, the trophies he took after, the small pieces of them he kept. Greg, Mary had turned around. Are you okay? You're sweating. He looked at her, and for an instant she was not herself. Her face was beaten in, one eye gone to a red ruin, blood running from her mouth and her nose, her jaw at a wrong angle dead, a thing he had made. He blinked and she was just Mary again, frightened, kind, asking after him. No, he said, and his voice broke. No, I don't think I'm okay. Chapter 9. A scream came from the trees, a man's scream, and then the world tore open. It was Josh. Out beyond the eastern stand, Josh had drawn his shard and lunged at Amir's back, and the fight that broke out was savage and graceless. Amir spun, deflected the first strike, and the two of them crashed together into the bracken. Amir had training, real training, that came up out of his hands without being asked. Economical strikes, a grip that turned the shard away from his throat, but Josh did not fight to a form. Josh fought like an animal in a sack, all weight and fury, biting, headbutting, driving Amir back into a tree, raking for his eyes. The shard scored a line across Amir's forearm. They broke apart, circled, and crashed together again. Josh got a fistful of dirt and flung it into Amir's face. It blinded him just for a second, and Josh wound back with the shard for the killing thrust. His ruined face split in a triumphant snarl, and his head left his shoulders. It happened without warning, without sound, a single horizontal sweep out of the trees behind him, and Josh's head simply came off and dropped into the brush. His expression was still fixed in its snarl, while his body stood an instant longer with the shard raised before it folded and fell. Blood fountained from the stump in great arterial gouts. Behind where Josh had stood, the brute filled the world. It was vast, far larger up close than any of them had let themselves believe. The filthy burlap sack hanging over its face, the rusted blade trailing red, and it stepped over Josh's twitching body without slowing and brought the blade up to take Amir's head from his shoulders too. A rifle cracked. The round took the brute high in the chest, a fist-sized punch that staggered it back a full step. It looked down at the wound, the burlap tilting, almost curious. Then it turned and walked unhurried into the trees and was gone. Sokka lowered the rifle from her shoulder. She'd come at the first scream, the old gun cradled in her hands like it had never left them, and she stood there now breathing hard, the scope still warm. Greg and Mary came crashing through the brush a moment later at the sound of the shot, and they all stood in a loose stunned circle around Josh's headless body and the steaming spray cooling on the leaves. It's real, Mary said very quietly. It was always real. The man in the kitchen, last night, it's all real. Amir was on his knees, smearing dirt and blood from his eyes, staring at the place in the trees where the thing had vanished. I shot it, Sokka said. Center of the chest, it walked away. She crossed to where the brute had stood, where Josh's blood had sprayed wide across the ground and the leaves and the trunks. She crouched. She looked. Then she stared up at them and her face had gone strange. There's Josh's blood everywhere, she said. All of it's his. She pointed at the boot prints pressed deep into the soft earth, the enormous tread of the thing. It took a rifle round through the chest and walked off, and it didn't leave one drop. Chapter 10. They came back to the camp with Josh's death sitting on them, and they reported the truth to each other in the failing light. No road, no track, no break in the trees in any direction they'd walked. Then how did we get here? Sokka asked. She'd asked it before, now it had teeth. 5 people, dropped in cabins, no car, no road, no trail, carried, all of us miles through the woods by who? By that thing, nobody answered. We didn't come here, she said slowly. Not the way you come to a place. Greg stood a little apart at the edge of the firelight, and in his head the voice was very loud now, and it had stopped wanting only Mary. Kill them all, it said, patient and warm. You know how, start with the small one. It will be so easy and you will feel so much better. Born again. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and tried to make it stop. Night fell. They moved into the lodge, barred the doors, and gathered what they could turn into weapons. Sokka worked over her rifle, counting rounds, a thin handful. Amir wedged chairs under the door handles and broke a table leg into a club. Mary sat in the corner and unwound the bandage on her hand to look in private at what was happening to her. The marks had spread. The back of her hand, her wrist, halfway up her forearm now were mottled brown, the patches run together, the skin gone thin and loose over them. She knew suddenly what they were, the knowledge arriving from nowhere with a cold certainty. Liver spots, the marks of a very old woman. She had the hand of a crone, decades older than her face. She stared at it, and then she wound the bandage back around it, tight, hiding it, and she said nothing to anyone, because she had begun to be afraid of the answer to the question of what she was. The loudspeaker cracked to life on a pole outside, and Abe's voice came through it, warm and amplified and everywhere. Good evening, my creations. I hope you're rested. I have to tell you I was a little disappointed today. A theatrical sigh. All that teamwork, all that leaning on each other. This camp isn't about fucking kumbayas, in case that wasn't clear. You weren't sent here to become a good little group. You were sent here to become, each of you alone, what you truly are. So tonight's a solo exercise, and as a small punishment for all that hand-holding, I think it's time you really got to know one another. I think it's time everyone put their cards on the table. A pause. Mary stared at her arm and somehow knew her secrets were about to be revealed. Mary, Abe's voice said fondly, poisoned a man, 45 years old, watched him die over his own dinner table and didn't lift a finger to help. The bottom dropped out of Mary's stomach because as he said it, the door in her mind swung open and it was true. She saw the dining room. She saw the man clutching his chest. She saw herself sitting still, hands folded, watching. Sokka committed war crimes, Abe went on, still chipper. More than she could count. She was very good at it. Sokka's rifle stilled in her hands. Amir sold out his own people, for money, for power. A great many of them died so that he could rise. Amir did not move at all. And Greg, a warm chuckle. Oh, Greg has a problem with women. It's the only way the poor man can finish. Isn't that right, Greg? The lodge had gone silent. They were all looking at each other now, the 4 of them in the low lamplight with the names of their crimes hanging in the air. The fragile thing they built, the we're in this together pact, came apart in an instant. Mary had edged away from Greg. Sokka had put her back to the wall so she could see all of them. The trust was gone, replaced by the dawning, sickening understanding that they were not innocents thrown together by chance. They were 5 monsters, and one of them was already dead. He's lying, Amir said, but his voice had lost its certainty. He's trying to turn us on each other. None of us remember, so how would he know? How do we know any of it's true? I know mine is true, Mary said. They looked at her. I saw him, her voice was barely there. Last night, in the kitchen, the man with the red eyes asking what I did to him. I thought I was high. I wasn't. She looked down at her bandaged hand. I poisoned him. I know it like you know your own name. And the worst part, her voice cracked, the worst part is I remember that I watched. I didn't look away. I watched him die on the floor and a part of me liked it. The door blew off its hinges. The heavy lodge door ripped from its frame and flung across the room. The brute came through the gap, ducking under the lintel, unfolding to its full impossible height inside the lodge. It went straight for Mary. One massive hand swept out, and she threw herself flat under it and felt the wind of it lift her hair. The blade came down and split the floor where she'd been. They scattered. Amir swung his table leg club at the thing's back, and it landed like a stick on a boulder. Sokka put 2 rifle rounds into its side at 10 feet, and it absorbed them like a man walking into rain. Greg grabbed Mary and hauled her up to shove her toward the back hall. The brute caught Sokka's rifle as she swung it up to fire again, closed one hand over the barrel and the stock, and broke it in half, the wood splintering, the steel folding, her name snapping in two. "Go," Ymir bellowed. "Split up, it can only chase one go." And they ran, out the back, into the dark in 4 directions, and the dark swallowed them one by one. Chapter 11. Ymir ran until the camp was behind him and found a building he didn't recognize, low and windowless. He ducked through its door to put a wall between himself and the thing in the trees. He pulled the door shut. He turned around. He was in an office. It was not a building in a camp. It was a vast and beautiful room, marble underfoot, a wall of windows looking out over a sun-struck city, a flag in the corner he half knew. Behind an enormous desk in a fine suit sat a man, and the man was Ymir. This other Ymir was older, heavier, prosperous, a president's sleekness on him. He had a phone to his ear. Ymir stood frozen in the doorway and watched himself speak and heard every word. "Tell your people we're grateful," the seated Ymir was saying, smooth, warm, in a voice for closing deals. "The aid is appreciated, the arrangement stands." A pause, a smile. "Of course, Langley will have its access. My friends in Washington have always been generous to those who understand how the world really works." He hung up. He made another call. His voice changed, dropped into the language of Ymir's blood, hard now, clipped. He named a man, a rival, and he gave an order, cool and final, to burn that man's house with his family inside it. A voice on the line, his lieutenant, said something, a protest. Ymir responded. "No, especially the children," and he did not blink. "Let them all be an example of what it costs to cross me." The vision tore, and through it Ymir saw flashes, small bodies in burning rooms, a child's shoe in the ashes, smoke standing over a street, the price of his rise paid out in the darkest currency. He had sold his revolution to the men who'd funded it. He had sold his people to keep his chair. He had been a survivor, methodical, calculated, and he had survived everything except what he'd done to survive. He stood in the marble office with his hands shaking, finally remembering, and he did not hear the burlap-masked thing fold itself through the doorway behind him until its shadow fell across the desk. Mary ran the other way, into a long, low building she took for a bunkhouse, and inside it were beds, a row of them, and on each bed a shape under a white sheet still. Bodies 5, 6 more, and among them moved Abe, humming, cheery, lifting a sheet here to pat a cold cheek, tucking another in with tender care, singing a camp song under his breath to the dead as if they were children at lights out. He turned as Mary came in, and his face lit up. "Mary, there you are. Come in, come in. Do you know these gentlemen?" He swept a hand over the shrouded shapes. "Take a look, go on. I think you'll find some old friends." She didn't want to. She went anyway, drawn, and lifted a sheet, and the face beneath it broke the door in her mind clean off its hinges. She knew him, she had loved him once, or made him believe she had, and the next, husbands, a row of husbands, men she'd married and grieved in public, men she'd watched fall over their dinners while she sat with her hands folded and her face arranged in mock alarm. The begging one with the red eyes was only the last. Before him, a string of them stretching back across years, decades, a long, patient career of marriage and widowhood and inheritance, of powders measured into evening meals, of the deep private warmth she felt watching the light go out of a trusting face. "There she is," Abe said softly, watching the knowledge move across her. "There's my girl. You always were the most patient of all of them. The others kill in a hot minute. You took your time. You savored it." He crossed to a cabinet she hadn't noticed and opened it. Inside, ranked on shelves, were bottles and jars and packets, a whole apothecary. The powders, white and gray and brown, were neatly labeled in a hand she recognized as her own. "To graduate, Mary, you don't have to kill that thing in the woods. Nobody can kill that. To graduate, you only have to be the last one standing." He smiled, kind as ever. "So do what you do best. Take care of your friends. You have all the tools you'll ever need right here." Mary looked at the poisons. She looked at them for a long time, and on her face in the lamplight, the moral struggle played out plain, the meek, soft surface and the thing beneath it that had always wanted to see. Chapter 12. Sokka saw Ymir step out of the shadows by the lodge and lifted her broken-off rifle stock to brain him before she recognized his face. He was trying to tell her something. His hand was pressed flat over his mouth, his eyes huge above it, and only a wet, muffled sound came through his fingers. "I can't hear you," she hissed. "Move your hands, speak up." He took a lurching step toward her. His hand dropped away from his mouth. But it hadn't been covering his mouth. It had been holding his jaw on. The lower half of his face came away with his hand, the jaw swinging loose on one hinge of skin, his tongue lolling down over the wet red ruin of his throat. The sound he'd been making went on without anything to shape it, a flat, bubbling moan. Behind him in the dark, the brute drew its arm back, and the rusted blade burst out through the front of Amir's stomach, a foot of steel slick and dark and ripped upward. Amir came apart down the middle, his insides spilling out across his own shoes in a steaming rope. Sokka was already moving, but the brute was faster. It gathered up a length of Amir's spilled entrails in one fist and whipped it out like a rope, where the wet coil lassoed her ankle and snapped taut as her feet went out from under her. She hit the ground hard. It hauled her in across the dirt, hand over hand, dragging her toward those tree trunk legs, the blade rising. She clawed at the earth and found nothing to hold. The burlap mask tilted down at her, patient, almost gentle, and the blade started its fall again. Then fire erupted across the brute's chest and shoulder. A bottle had shattered against it, and flames ran up the burlap and across the great chest in a sheet. The thing reared back, the entrail rope going slack, and Sokka kicked free and scrambled up. Greg stood in the dark with a second Molotov already lit with the lodge's stolen vodka and a rag, his arm cocked. The brute beat at the flames, climbing its mask, then turned and walked, even now unhurried, into the trees, burning, until the dark took it. Greg dropped the second bottle and came to her. She was on her knees beside what was left of Amir, soaked in the man's blood, shaking. Greg crouched in front of her, and his eyes weren't right. He was looking at her, at the blood sheeting down her face from a gash in her scalp, at the wreck the night had made of her, and the warmth in his belly rose again. The voice inside was singing. It would be so easy. She was already down, already painted red. Finish it. Finish what you started in the cabin. His hand came up. There was a smear of blood on her lower lip, and Greg reached out with his thumb to wipe it slowly away before he brought the thumb to his own mouth. "We never finished," he said, low and thick and not entirely himself. "One of these nights, you and me, we're going to finish what we started." Sokka had gone very still under his hand, the cold animal stillness of prey that knows running will only make it worse. "Get away from me," she said quietly. Something in her voice reached down through the warmth and the singing and snagged on the part of Greg that had thrown himself off the bunk, that had seen the knife in the glass. He blinked and pulled his hand back like he'd touched a stove. He stood fast, backing off 2 steps, and the horror came up in his face again, horror at himself, at the thing that lived in him and kept reaching for the wheel. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I'm trying to be," but he couldn't finish it. Chapter 13. They found Mary in the bunkhouse. She looked shaken and off, but she didn't tell them what she'd seen, or what Abe had offered, or what she'd taken from the cabinet. The 3 of them held a fast council in the dark while the brute burned somewhere in the trees. It would be back. They all knew it would be back. The thing couldn't be killed. Rounds and fire only sent it away to nurse itself and return. So they reasoned their way to the only lever they could see. The brute served Abe. Abe ran the camp. If they could end Abe, maybe they could end the thing, or at least the thing that kept aiming it at them. "Then we find Abe," Sokka said, "tonight while it's licking its wounds." Mary went to the lodge and came back with a jug of water. "Here," she said, offering it around. "Drink. We've been running all night. We'll cramp up. We need water. I already had mine." Greg shook his head. Sokka eyed the jug and didn't reach for it. "I'm fine." "You should really drink," Mary said. She pushed it toward Sokka, then Greg, a half step too insistent, her eyes moving between their faces. "Please, it's a long night still. Drink." "I said I'm fine." Sokka's voice had an edge. Something flickered across Mary's face there and gone, a clear disappointment before the soft, anxious mask came back down. She lowered the jug. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She reached into her jacket and brought out Sokka's improvised blade, the steel one from the first night, the one that had killed the kneeling man. "You dropped this, back at the lodge in the fight. Here." Sokka took it. The grip was a little tacky under her fingers, but everything in this place was filthy with blood, so she thought nothing of it, and she wrapped her hand around it and felt better for having a weapon again. Abe's voice drifted to them then from out in the woods, calling friendly, distant. "Yoo-hoo, This way, creations, come find your counselor. We've got so much left to talk about. They went into the trees after the voice. The woods at night were a held breath. They moved in a tight knot, Sokka ahead with her blade, Greg behind with his last bottle of fire, Mary in the middle with her bandaged hand pressed to her stomach. Abe's voice led them on, never closer, never farther, drawing them deeper. Greg walked close to Sokka and tried to find words. "Back there," he started, "and in the cabin, I want you to know I'm—" The words wouldn't come. Everything he reached for was too small. "I'm trying," was all he managed. She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either, and he took that for more than it was. The trees opened onto a clearing, and in the clearing was a grave. A single grave, old, the mounded earth sunken with years, and at its head a slab of rough stone. Around it, ringed in the dirt, more stones, and on the stones, carved deep and dark with age markings. They were not Christian. They were older, stranger, a circle of figures and characters that hurt to look at directly, that suggested a faith with roots driven down far below anything in Abe's cheerful brochures. The air in the clearing was wrong, heavy, the cold of it different from the cold of the woods. Abe stepped out from behind the headstone, with his arm already around Sokka's throat. He'd crossed the clearing without a sound, and now he had her from behind, one soft forearm locked across her windpipe. And for all her speed and all her training, she could not break the grip, because the arm holding her was not as soft as it looked and was not, anymore, entirely an arm. "SHH," Abe said gently to all of them as Greg started forward and stopped. "SHH now, the head counselor is talking. You'll want to hear this part. It's the part where it all makes sense." He held Sokka easily and addressed the other two over her shoulder. His voice had kept all its warmth, but something had begun to move underneath it, something vast and old and amused. "You wanted to know what that thing in the woods is. You wanted to know why it doesn't bleed, why it won't die, where it goes when you hurt it." He nodded toward the grave. "It comes here. When an instrument's body finally fails, it's laid down in ground like this, in a grave like this one, and it rises again refreshed, renewed, ready to go back to the work of keeping the world afraid. It's the oldest job there is. There has always been a behemoth walking in every age under every name. From the golem to Goliath to the modern day, it has been there. The shape at the edge of the firelight that your oldest grandmother's grandmother was warned about. There will always be a behemoth to cull the herd and keep fear fresh." His eyes moved over the three of them, and they had gone dark all the way through, no white left. "Now you all must decide. This is the moment where you embrace your true nature. Will you be the hunter or the slaughtered?" Suddenly, the brute emerged from the trees. It came whole, the burns gone, the burlap fresh, the blade clean, completely renewed, and it came fast. Sokka tore free of Abe in the confusion, and Greg flung his last bottle. It missed, but it gave enough time for the others to dash away. The behemoth, however, was faster. Sokka took a slash across the ribs that opened her up and put her down on one knee. The brute loomed over her, blade rising, that all too familiar pose. And Greg, who had spent 2 days and 2 nights fighting the thing inside him, who had wanted to be better and not known how, found out how. He threw himself between Sokka and the blade. The steel went into him instead of her, deep up under the ribs, and he gasped and grabbed the brute's arm and held the thing there with the last of his strength, and screamed at Sokka to run. And she ran. She dragged herself up and ran, and Mary with her, and the brute wrenched its blade free of Greg and let them go because there was no hurry. With it, there was never any hurry. Greg sank down at the foot of the grave with both hands pressed to the hole in his middle, and Abe came and crouched in front of him, beaming, delighted. "Well, look at you," Abe said softly. "A noble gesture, from you of all people, what a thing." He tilted his head. "Do you even know who you're being noble for? The Biscayne butcher, 23 women, strangled in the dark, carved up after, dumped in the wetlands and the landfills, missing fingers, missing toes, pieces of their tongues that you kept in a freezer to take out and hold when the mood was in you." Abe's smile widened. "Did you miss your little trophies, Greg, all that time you were rotting in the hole? Is that the warmth you kept reaching for?" And the last door in Greg's mind came open, and he remembered. He remembered being strapped down. Wrists, ankles, a band across his chest, a cold metal seat, and men's voices reading words, and then the world had gone white and blazing, every nerve in his body on fire at once, his back arching against the straps while the current poured through him and the light died out of his own eyes from the inside. He remembered the first death, the hot one. He understood, looking down at the cooling blood between his fingers, that this was the second. I remember, Greg whispered. This cold, it's already happened, but it was hot the first time, so hot. His eyes found Abe's black ones. I died before. And this, Abe said with great tenderness, was your final chance at salvation, my son. You did try at the end. I'll give you that. It won't be enough. He smiled, and his mouth in the moonlight was full of teeth gone brown and soft with rot and filed to points, far too many of them. But it was a lovely try. The light went out of Greg for the second time, and this time it did not come back. Chapter 14. Sokka pulled Mary down behind a fallen log 100 yards off. She pressed a hand to the wound between her ribs and made a plan, because making plans was the only thing that had ever kept her alive. Can't kill it, she breathed. But we don't have to. You heard him. It comes back through the grave, so we put it in the grave and we keep it there. She pointed through the trees to the clearing, to the sunken mound and the great loose boulder that sat at its edge, a slab the size of a car door balanced on the lip of the open ground. We get it onto the grave. I bait it. You're behind the boulder. When it's standing on the mound, you push, and we drop that rock over the hole and we bury it in its own door. It never gets out. Can you do that, Mary? Can you push the rock? I can push the rock, said Mary in a voice that seemed feeble than before. Her delicate movements also made her statement questionable, as Sokka noticed the wealth of wrinkles that had sprouted across her face. With no other choice, she pressed on anyway. You wait for my signal, not before, not after. I have to get it standing right on the grave or this doesn't work, so you wait until I'm clear and I yell, and then you push with everything you have. Okay. Okay, Mary said. They got into position. Sokka limped out into the clearing, into the brute's sight, holding her blade, taunting it, drawing it toward the grave, toward the mounded earth, one slow backward step at a time. The thing followed. It came onto the soft ground of the grave, its huge feet sinking into the old earth, exactly where she needed it, and Sokka braced to spring clear and filled her lungs to give the signal. Now she screamed, Mary now. Mary did not push the rock. She stood behind the boulder with both hands flat against the cold stone, and she did not push it. Instead, she watched. The brute's hand closed around Sokka's arm. Sokka twisted to break free, a defensive move she'd done 100 times, but her body did not answer. Her arm wouldn't come. Her legs had gone strange and far away. A heaviness was pouring up through her, out of her hand, out of the grip of the blade Mary had returned to her, the grip that had been just a little tacky, just a little wrong. The poison had been going into her skin for an hour, drop by drop, climbing her arm, reaching for her heart. Not the water. It had never been the water. The water was the misdirection, the obvious thing to refuse. The poison was in the one thing Sokka would never put down, her weapon. She looked across the clearing at Mary, standing safe behind the rock with her hands flat against it, not pushing, and she understood everything in the last, clear second she had. You, Sokka said. The brute lifted her off the ground by the arm, and Sokka, with the last of a body that was shutting down nerve by nerve, swung her free leg back and drove her heel into the base of the balanced boulder with everything she had left. The rock rolled. It went off its lip and tipped and came down, not over the grave, but sideways, onto the soft ground at the grave's edge where Mary stood frozen behind it, and it caught her as she finally understood and tried to scramble back. Too late. It crushed her against the earth with a sound that ended her mid-scream. The boulder settled. One arm stuck out from under the edge of it, and the hand at the end of that arm was an old woman's hand, wrinkled, spotted, the bandage fallen away, the fingers slowly going still. Sokka hung in the brute's grip and watched Mary die. She felt her own death climbing the last few inches to her heart, and she thought, with the strange supreme clarity of the very end, that Mary had very nearly won. But that in this killing, there was no one better than herself. A party favor unrolled with a cheery little squawk. Abe stood at the edge of the clearing, blowing a paper noisemaker, and with his other hand he threw a fistful of confetti into the cold air, where it drifted down over the grave, the boulder, and the dead. He was clapping again, that big delighted clap, beaming at Sokka, where she hung dying in his instrument's fist. Game over, he sang. Oh, well played all around, and we have a winner. But he was changing as he said it. He was growing. The robin's egg polo split down the seams and fell away. 2 horns curled up out of his thinning hair and kept going, ridged and black. His soft hands lengthened into claws. His sunburned skin went gray, then darker, and his eyes were already black, and now the whole of them swam with something that moved. He rose up taller than the brute, the very trees making room for him, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped down through the floor of the world. "I am Abe," he said, "to those lucky enough to enroll in my bit of summer fun, but I have worn a great many names across a great many ages. The oldest of them is Abaddon, and you, child, are not in any camp in any woods on the earth you remember." He spread his vast arms over the clearing, the grave, the dead. "You're in my country. You've been here the whole time." Chapter 15. The poison reached Sokka's heart, and as it stopped, her memory opened all the way, the last door, the biggest one, and she saw it all. She saw a younger self in black, a checkered scarf, a rifle she hadn't earned slung across a body that had not yet learned mercy. She saw the villages, she saw the lists. She saw herself marching women and children to the edges of pits at the orders of men in better uniforms, and she saw her own face as she did it, a loyal soldier of the Khmer Rouge. And the terrible thing, the thing that damned her, was that there had been nothing in that face at all. Not hate, not pleasure. Not even the cold satisfaction the others took. Just a machine doing a thing, efficient, untroubled. A girl who had decided that feeling was a weakness she could not afford and had cut it out of herself with her own hands. She had told herself it was for her country. She had been very good at it, and it had bought her in the end a wall at dawn and a line of rifles and a death in the red dirt under a white sky, executed by the same revolution she'd served. "You all died up there," Abaddon said, watching the knowledge break over her. "Every one of you, long ago, most of you. You only forgot because forgetting is the kindness I offer at the start before the games begin." He gestured at the boulder, at the old spotted hand sticking out from under it. "Your friend Mary there, poisoned 11 husbands across 30 years, died in a prison cell in 1953, an old woman after a term of 48 years. She's screaming now in a pit I keep, feeling each of her 11 deaths laid over the other, all at once, forever. The man Amir, the president, the children in the fire, the butcher and his trophies, and you." His black gaze was almost warm. "When your spirit lets go, which is now, child, now, you go back down to the place I plucked you from, the 9th ring, the bottom, reserved for the worst that mankind ever made. Your tortures will pick up exactly where they left off, and they will go on until the last star in the sky has guttered out, and then they will go on after that." Sokka could not speak. The clearing was going dark at its edges. "Or," Abaddon said, and his voice changed, dropped the millennia of weight, became almost intimate, a salesman leaning across a table at the close. "Or before you take that last breath, you make a deal with your new master, me." He smiled, and the brown-filed teeth caught the moon. "I'm in the market, you see. An instrument's body fails eventually, even renewed, and that one's nearly used up. I need a new one. A behemoth must always walk the earth to do my bidding and reap more souls. And of all 5 of you, all that magnificent monstrosity I gathered into this camp, you, child, you are the worst, the cleanest. The girl who cut out her own heart and never missed it. You have the will, you have the drive that doesn't tire. You have the thirst for it that runs all the way to the bottom and finds no bottom there. The others killed for hunger or for greed or for the broken wiring in their heads. You killed for nothing at all and didn't flinch, and that is rare. That is a gift." He leaned close, and the whole black country leaned with him. "A new body, a new life, a purpose that never ends. You'll never be the slaughtered again. You'll be the thing at the edge of the firelight that the grandmothers warn about. You'll be fear itself, incarnate on an endless mission, doing the thing you of all do best. It's a better prize than a rifle." His black eyes held her fading ones. "What do you say?" Sokka breathed in, one last shallow breath, the dark almost complete now, the offer hanging in the rank air over the grave. Then she decided. A new pair of eyes opens. Chapter 16. They come to in close, packed dark, a weight of cold earth pressing down from above, and for a moment there is only the slow return of sensation to an unfamiliar body. Somewhere far off, muffled through soil, there is laughter. Young laughter, careless, the laughter of people who have never once been afraid for their lives. A radio finds a station, something with a synthesizer in it, bright and stupid and warm, and the laughter rises to meet it. A hand pushes up through the dirt. It is an enormous hand. The fingers are thick as table legs, the back of it ridged with old scars, and it tears up through the grave's loose earth and grips the lip of the hole and pulls. The body that follows is vast, a head and a half taller than any man, broad past reason, and it climbs up out of the grave into the cold night air and stands, swaying once, finding its balance in a frame it has only just been given. It looks down at its new hands. It turns them over, slow, learning them. There is a weapon waiting, the blade buried point down in an old stump at the clearing's edge, rusted, layered black with the blood of ages. The figure crosses to it and works it free. It studies the long edge. Then with the fine point of one claw, it scratches something into the steel near the haft, slow and deliberate, the way it once carved a name into the stock of a rifle. 4 letters, a signature, a way of marking what is hers now. SOKHA. Past the trees, down the slope, firelight. A handful of young people around a bonfire, passing a bottle, groping one another, swallowing pills, and dancing badly to the synth on the radio. Their whole bright, careless night is just beginning. They do not know the danger of these woods. They do not know this will be their last night on Earth, and they do not know what has just stood up out of the ground 100 yards away in the dark. The behemoth reaches down and takes up the filthy burlap sack, the one the old instrument wore, and pulls it down over a face that no longer needs a name. Only the mouth shows beneath the ragged hem. The mouth cracks open into a horrible smile. And the hunt continues.